to Conversations. I'm your moderator for tonight, Carol Roy. I've been involved with Insight for about 40 years, and I'm now a volunteer. I'm on the volunteer leadership team for Insight Boston. We are so lucky to have with us tonight Janet Parker and Mike Connor, who are Boston area Insight facilitators. They go all over the world, but we're lucky enough to have them in Boston. They'll be talking about expanding compassion. You'll notice that tonight is a webinar, and so most of the time you'll only be able to see Janet and Mike. But if you'd like to participate, you can send them questions through the Q&A icon. You can ask either as an anonymous attendee, or we'll use just your first name. And for tonight, the chat is disabled. And now I would like to invite Janet and Mike to come on screen and introduce themselves.
Well, hello, everybody. I will just jump right in here. Thank you, Carol, for that wonderful introduction. And it's wonderful to be back once again with you, Janet, and have the opportunity to converse. I think last time we did establish that you, it sounds like you and Carol started Insight about the same time when you were both about 5 years old in the toddler program, clearly.
Exactly.
40 years ago. And we're coming into our third conversation. So those of you who joined us in the last 2 weeks, wonderful to have you back. If you're joining us for the first time, wonderful to have you. And as Carol mentioned, please participate with us. We would love to hear your questions or comments as we go through our conversation together. Janet, I know that while a number of the folks in the call know you and know you well, I'm guessing there might be a few that don't know you and maybe haven't done Insight in the past. And so maybe you can just take a minute to say hello and share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks so much, Mike. I'm giggling here because it was my music that was playing too loud, and I'm thinking that it was Dawn running the webinar. I had put some music on in the background and forgotten I'd done it. So I realized it was mine and turned it down after sending messages to others to turn the music down. So apologies, Dawn. And this is real life, Mike. So here we are, right? So I might as well fess up about that.
And practice self-compassion while you're at it, right?
That's right. See, I have great compassion for myself. Yes, so I've been leading seminars here in the Boston area since the mid 80s, was an organizer for Insight prior to that for several years. And Boston's my hometown. I'm so thrilled to be here with you, Mike, and having two of us here in the city. I think that's what's really kept Insight going here. The fact that the two of us are here, along with an amazing group of people that have been willing to step forward and volunteer time to keep the light glowing in Boston. So pleasure to be here and pleasure to have these conversations with you, Mike. It's so fun to have people just kind of eavesdropping to the kind of thing we'd talk about even if we didn't have an audience. So it's great. Why don't you tell folks a little bit more about you, Mike?
Yeah, well, it's wonderful to be back on having the conversation with you, Janet. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Connor. I also live in the Boston area, as you've heard, although I've had the opportunity to live in some other areas, and as Carol mentioned, traveled quite a bit with Insight. Really a pleasure to be able to facilitate seminars here in the Boston area in particular. I have two children, ages, young adults now, 21 and 19. Been involved with Insights for about 30 years now. My full-time gig is I'm a leadership consultant and facilitator, which has changed quite a bit over the last year since COVID, doing a lot of it online, like I know you too, Janet, do like your work, a lot of work online now. One of the things before we kick things off is Carol mentioned this is a webinar format, and it's a little different than a lot of the stuff that we have done in the past with Insight, where you can see a whole number of other people, whether it's on the screen or in a room, and connect with people and do kind of sharing where the facilitator works back and forth with you. And, we'll do more of those types of events. I've heard feedback both ways. I've heard some people say, oh, I'd like to see everybody else is on the call. And I've also heard some people say, oh, it's really nice to be able to just kind of listen in and not really care how I look or have to put my makeup on or, and not have to agree to a series of agreements before I come in. So
Right.
I think there's value both ways. And we want to really just invite you, as mentioned earlier, that if you would like to engage, please don't hesitate to drop us a line in the Q&A in terms of your comments or questions. Yeah, and we thought a nice way to kick this one off, particularly around compassion, might be with a little something we often do in Insight, which is a little kind of reflective or closed eye process. And
Sure.
you want
Sure.
to start us off?
Yeah, let's do it. I've even got obviously a little background music that I can play. So for those of you that are familiar, obviously, all I have to say is close your eyes. For those of you that are new to a little guided closed eye process, just close your eyes if you'd like to, and relax. And I'm going to guide you through some reflection in the process. Yes, so start with a few deep breaths, perhaps. And just allow yourself to relax with each breath. Let your body settle down and come present to this moment, here and now, letting go of the busyness of your day and, as much as possible, the busyness of your mind. And relax the emotions as you relax your body. And just bring your focus to my words and this quiet moment. We'd like to do a little reflecting tonight on compassion and what compassion means for us. And how do we practice more compassion so that our hearts expand with more? It's certainly been a challenging world these days. So I'd like you to reflect for a moment and bring to mind some of the people in your life that it's easy to have compassion for, that you find your heart going out to, your heart feeling the sympathetic response to what they're going through, the heart aching and wishing to do something to help them out of that beautiful feeling we call compassion. We do see a lot in our culture and society of examples of people that are in need and need our support, our love, our contributions. There's so many wonderful organizations that help people in need. Our compassion is drawn upon a lot, and we all respond according to our ability. And I'm proud of the fact that we do. And so thank yourself for doing that. Thank yourself for the ways that you've made donations or contributions or reached out or given kind words to people. Appreciate yourself for that in whatever ways you've done that. Even just the momentary feeling of sympathy or compassion can make a difference in someone's life. And so now, if you would, just bring to mind some people that are it's a little bit more difficult to have compassion for. And I'd like you to choose one person in your current life that you find it difficult to have compassion for. Maybe someone you know, a public figure, someone you've seen or know about. And when you think of that person, you don't have those good feelings. You don't have that desire to help or the desire to contribute, or you don't even wish good for them. And there's a beautiful meditation from A Course in Miracles that I'm going to follow along a little bit with here. And as it says in the Course, you've probably chosen that person already. So I'd like you to bring that person to mind and picture them and see them in that way you usually do. It makes it difficult for you to feel good feelings for them or compassionate or sympathetic feelings towards them. And then I'd like you to imagine in their hearts the tiniest bit of light. Maybe you imagine them with their young children, or you imagine them as a young child. Whatever you might need to do to bring a picture of a little light in their heart. And then as you breathe and see them in front of you, imagine that light growing and growing and growing until that light is so strong glowing out of their hearts that it makes your picture of them beautiful and good. And then imagine them beaming at you and sending that light right to you. And you receive that light from them. And perhaps you imagine that light blending together. And you stand together bathed in that light. And just take in that picture for a moment. And notice if it's created any kind of a shift in you, in your feelings towards that person. And then you can let the imagination go, let the image go. And gently bring your awareness back to us here and now. And when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes. And bringing your awareness fully back to Mike and I and your computer and the webinar. Notice if there's a shift in your feeling at all. I know I was doing it while I was leading it, and I definitely had a shift, even though I was also focused on leading the little visualization. I also felt a shift, and I started seeing interesting, good pictures of the person that I was visualizing. So it was interesting. Mike, how about you? Any shift?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that we do a process somewhat like this in one of our seminars, or maybe multiple times. I began to think of the person as a child, like when they were a child. And so began to, instead of seeing them as the adults and, the judgments maybe that I was holding towards them, I began to think of them as a child. And as I thought of them as a child, my heart began to open and I noticed more of that compassion coming in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that's interesting is I was doing it with somebody else. And I noticed sometimes for me, Janet, the hardest person for me to have compassion for is for myself.
Yep.
If we were in a seminar room, I would say, raise your hand if compassion for yourself is harder than giving compassion to somebody else. And I'd be curious, in terms of the people on the call, how many might actually say that uh, it's actually more difficult sometimes to be gentle with myself, be compassionate with myself, or forgive myself than maybe somebody else.
Sometimes we have our hearts are hardest towards ourselves, right? We're the most judgmental, basically. It comes down to self-judgment, I think. We're the most judgmental towards ourselves because we hold ourselves to such high standards.
I think what you just spoke to is that interesting that we hold a standard for ourselves, and that in and of itself is not a negative thing. I think there's a natural part of us that wants to grow, and I think in the last couple of conversations we talked about the natural desire to grow, and then that kind of relationship with also accepting ourselves in terms of where we are. And I think our whole focus on compassion or forgiveness brings in that sense of humanity that hopefully I know that when you were doing the process right then, it certainly worked to close that gap, right? Whether it's with ourselves or with somebody else. Um, and in so doing, I think there's a natural connecting into our own heart, because I notice when I'm holding judgment towards myself or someone else, it's very hard for me to kind of be heart-centered.
Yeah. Yeah. And the truth is, yes, if I'll speak for myself, when I'm in judgment of someone else, I don't feel very loving towards myself either, right? Maybe that's really the point you were making. Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed something this afternoon. As I was reflecting on the conversation we're having tonight, and I was thinking about compassion, and I realized that it's difficult for me to have compassion for someone if I don't feel that they have any regret or any regret, or they haven't learned anything from their actions. Like for me, someone who's a bully and never gets to realize that it isn't a good thing to be a bully, it's very hard for me to have compassion for. I have to reach deeper to find the light in that person. Of course, with children, you can figure that they probably experienced being bullied at some point in their lives, and that's why they're bullying. And then that can bring forward the compassion for me. A little harder with adult bullies, but same thing. They probably experienced some sort of pain or hurt around being bullied themselves, and that's why they turn around and bully others. I don't know. This is what I tell myself.
Well, what's interesting, you were just speaking, we were talked a little bit about the mirror, right, in a couple of our previous sessions. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of something I hadn't really thought of before, which is there a part of me that's bullying myself? So, that part of me that's hard on me, it's interesting. A part of me that's hard on me is being a bit of a bully, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, I don't want to make that part wrong either, right? So as soon as I start going there, I don't have compassion for the bully inside of me. So I don't tend to think of myself as a bully, but if I think of how hard I can be on myself sometimes, that's kind of almost like a bully voice. It's kind of telling myself I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, whatever that message is. So it's quite interesting to kind of bring that inside and notice, and can I bring compassion to that voice inside of me?
So, all right, I'm going to make one comment and then we're going to ask about questions because we promised we would. Of course, Mike, I don't need to tell you this, but you want to look at where is that bullying part of you coming from, right? What hurt place created that part inside you? And what do you need to remind yourself of? Right? Yeah. So is it Carol that's manning our questions for us or womaning our questions for us? Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes,
Hey,
it
Carol.
is. And I had 5 great questions and you just ticked through all of them.
Oh, no kidding.
Luckily, here is another.
Okay.
Is it possible and desirable to be completely non-judgmental, especially when the person requires accountability for evil acts? Oh, never mind, you did that one too. What does being non-judgmental really mean?
Say the last part again, Carol?
What does non-judgmental really mean?
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Mike, you can take that one. No, I'm
Well,
happy.
I mean, I think it's a really good question because I oftentimes will say, at least my point of view is, you might not want to set the bar of being non-judgmental, but being aware of when you are judging. I think one of the big, I don't know if I'd call it a big shift, Janet, with me or whoever asked the question, is when I noticed that I have to be careful about holding a standard of being non-judgmental. Because quite honestly, as a human being, I don't know that I ever will be. And then the only problem is that almost gets in as a double whammy. Because if I judge myself when I'm judgment, it's like I can double down on the judgment. And we talked a little bit about this last time, and with some somewhat different language, which is, can I accept myself even when I'm judging?
Yes.
Can I bring an acceptance to the fact that as a human being, sometimes I will judge, and that sounds like, it almost sounds like double speak. And yet, if I try to hold the standard of being not judgmental, I will tend to then judge myself when I judge. Yeah, I'll stop there. And
I remember once in a seminar I was doing, we were having a conversation about forgiveness, and one of the participants, we were in quite a rich discussion about it. Was some years ago, but I've always remembered how this person said, was very upset and needed a kind of some guidance around what to do when she couldn't forgive. I just can't forgive. What's wrong with me? Why can't I forgive? I keep harping on this thing that happened and I can't forgive. I can't forgive. And similarly to what you're saying, Mike, right now, I realized, sort of a little light bulb went off in my head, was that she had to forgive herself for not being able to forgive. It's kind of the same thing. Accept yourself for not being able to judge, forgive yourself for not being able to forgive, instead of still holding this standard of perfection that we sometimes do. Have a softer heart towards ourselves. We don't have to be perfect. And as far as the question, is it even desirable to be completely non-judgmental? I don't know. I just hold Buddha and Gandhi and Jesus as my standards. So I've got to be careful with that stuff, because I do think that, they're models for us of being completely non-judgmental. And
I'll bet that they judge at times.
Sure.
Human beings. I mean,
exactly, because they're human.
Right.
They're
Right.
Yeah. What else, Carol?
Well, Robin says listening is important for being compassionate. So how can I be a better listener when I have so many thoughts running through my head?
That's a great question.
Let me just offer, I just want to acknowledge that all of us talk about and want to be good listeners. And I think we all know that it's good to be a good listener. And it really is a practice. I mean, it really takes awareness and dedication to be a good listener, because Robin, you called it out perfectly. Almost all of us are, there's competing voices. They're the voice we're working to listen to, and then there's the self-talk in our head. And many of us, when we're listening, immediately get triggered into what we want to say next, or where what they just said triggered some other thought for us, or we can go all over the place that can take us away from. And I love that you ask about listening when it comes to compassion, because one of the best ways I can demonstrate compassion for somebody is really to listen deeply, to really work to understand, not just with my head, but with my heart, what they're saying. And I don't want to minimize that like that's an easy thing to do. I know that it takes a lot of awareness, a lot of intention, a lot of practice on my part to be really present with someone, to listen deeply, and to do my best and not have kind of my thoughts in my head or what I want to say next get in the way of that.
It's great, Mike. I'm reflecting on our conversation we had earlier about deeply listening when we're on the telephone with someone.
Mm.
Mike and I were talking about the value of Zoom and having the visuals versus the value of the old way of just being on the phone, and how sometimes not being distracted by the visuals, we can, be on the telephone with someone and listen quite deeply to them with eyes closed and really tuning into them. I also think for me, if I go into thinking that I have to come up with a solution or something, even something to help or something to fix, when someone is going through something, if I'm trying to fix it, I'm usually not listening as deeply as I could. And if I instead can just remind myself to value the listening itself, and not that I have to come up with solutions for them, then the person is going to feel more heard and receive my compassionate understanding more deeply. So, yeah. So maybe we're not worrying about something to coming up with something that'll help fix it can help us be better listeners. Yeah.
What else, Carol? Do you have another one?
This is a comment from Tim. I'm normally very up and optimistic, while today I'm having some self-judgment. I'm shooting myself without compassion. I noticed through the centering that I can have a shift with another person. I have a harder time with myself, hold a higher standard for myself. Now, as I hear you talking about this, I can let go of my harsh self-judgment. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for acknowledging um, what's true for so many of us in terms of that part that can be hard on ourselves. Um, and thank you for acknowledging your ability to make the shift.
Mhm.
I think, Janet, one of the things that's when I was reflecting on this conversation, how really at the heart of our work with Insight is compassion and forgiveness.
Yeah.
When we go through the journey, and our journey is usually a journey of kind of peeling away and looking at that more limiting, our fears and our doubts and in the Insight too, we call it the limiting character, and bringing that to the surface. And before we can move over into the more heart-centered or expansive part of ourselves, we need to go through some process of compassion and self-forgiveness, and which then allows us to kind of connect back into our heart. And we model that in a seminar, but I think that's also in a micro way. That's what we're doing in life, right? Is to some degree to get to the heart of compassion. I need to be willing to kind of look at whatever it is that's kind of come up for me. If I, Tim was mentioning, like I have this self-talk or I'm having a judgment towards somebody else, is to not deny that, like to not pretend or to judge it, but to acknowledge it. But then in acknowledging it, bring some awareness to it. And I think as we bring awareness, it comes back to that thing: as I can bring more awareness, I can have more choice about what choices I have here. Because I think one other thought is what's tricky is when I go into, I'll speak for me, when I go into judgment, as you mentioned, I move out of my heart and I lose awareness, and I sometimes lose the ability to recognize I have a choice, because there's such a theme in terms of choice that we speak about. And yet the more I go into judgment, I think the more I move out of my heart, move out of awareness, and move out of choice. So then the challenge I think of in terms of, for me, is how can I have that? I sometimes say, how can we have awareness when I need my awareness most when I have at least, really, it's like I need my awareness most when I have at least. And so what are some of the ways that I can help get awareness, or even have some people around me, that, the people I trust to maybe remind me some way that I can be reminded and kind of move back into my heart, into my awareness, so I can recognize, kind of see myself from a distance, kind of get that observer, kind of get that, that part that can kind of move away from being in the middle of it. Because when we get locked in judgment, it almost locks us in and we lose perspective. So, it's like, and I kind of keep thinking about, like, what are some of the ways I or we can get the awareness sooner to recognize what we're doing, to get some perspective, to make a choice to help us out of that space.
Yeah. And I immediately go to self-inquiry, right? So that's really, I think, in a way, what you're talking about, the awareness, that having enough presence of mind and awareness to ask ourselves what's going on, right? So, and I think one of the great ways to do that is to notice our feelings, right? Our feelings usually remind us that we're not thinking such good stuff, right? It will reflect in our feelings. So, um, so we notice I've got a knot in my stomach, right? Oh, well, what have I been thinking about? Oh, I've been thinking about how stupid I am because I did such and such. Oh, okay. Well, that doesn't feel good. All right. What could I tell myself instead? I'd say, all right. So maybe you didn't handle that perfectly, but it's really okay. I can say some soothing or some kind words to myself, have some compassion for myself.
Mm.
So is it using the feelings as kind of like the trigger to bring awareness in,
Mm.
I think is really helpful. Um, And I'm just thinking, is this true for other people too? So I'm reflecting on my person I did the closed eye process with. What do my feelings tell me? Ooh, my feelings aren't feeling good when I think of that person. And maybe that could, maybe that could work just as well for me as a reminder to do the inquiry. Um, I'm feeling these feelings of dislike and disgust about this person. And oh, okay, wake up call. What am I thinking about this person? What have I decided about this person? What judgment am I holding, and how could I shift that? So again, so feelings being a guide, I guess.
Yeah, and I love that you referenced it, because oftentimes we think of feelings as something that are more related to relationships, and they are, and we can bring them over there. And I love the reference point of feelings as feedback, right, to
Mm.
us to
Yeah.
recognize where our state is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Cool. Carol, what else?
I have a comment that goes right along with what you just said. This is from Lionel. For me, the feeling of getting softer in the heart, which translates to being softer towards the person, is my signal that I'm tuned in to compassion. Conversely, the unwillingness to listen, impatience to want the person to finish talking, is a signal to myself I need to stop. I need to just stop.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Lionel. It's beautiful.
And there is a question also. Ben says, I think compassion comes from being humble, realizing that I'm a human and not above anyone else. What do you think about that?
Mm. Realizing I'm human.
I, I I could totally agree with, my curiosity goes to the second part of your question. Um, and yes, first part, yes, there's something about compassion that's about our humanity. And I think we've kind of referenced that. We could speak more to that. I'm thinking about what you referenced about not thinking I'm above anybody else. And it's really interesting, our tendency to compare. There is something that feels pretty human, or at least for this human over here, me, which is I can tend to compare, like, and I can do, if I reference, in the Insight One, we focus on these, what we call games, right? And in life, like, we play what we call these games, which are these patterns of thinking that really don't serve me. They're more limiting patterns. And coming back to comparison is one of the big games that we can tend to do, and I know I can tend to do. And I have a little bit of one where I'll either sometimes unconsciously see myself as above someone else or beneath somebody else, and instead of just and to go beyond that game, part of my practice is doing the very thing like you led in our closed eye process, which is how can I see past the, whatever external game I'm doing in terms of the judgment or the comparison, and look more deeply into their humanity and into my humanity, or even into what we can kind of call the soul. And it feels like, that begins to melt away. But I love that you called out a little bit of this tendency for us to compare. and the opportunity for us to bring compassion to ourselves and others as a way to begin to kind of let go of that, because it can be a bit of my experience is that it can be one of those things that can really knock us around a lot.
Yeah. It's an interesting, Ben, your reflection. I'm thinking that when I'm most judgmental is probably when and when I'm feeling superior, like one of the games, right? Superior, inferior, Mike, you're referring to, right? So I'm feeling superior and I'm feeling like I'm telling myself something like, oh, I've got this handled. Look at them. They're, they haven't got this handled, obviously. Yeah, I'm even doing that with my person who I was just reflecting on, right? I'm superior to them, which is interesting to recognize. And when I can be more human about it, it also helps me be more human towards them, like feel their humanity more too. So it is definitely about recognizing the boat we're all in together as human beings, and how, yeah, we're not perfect. There's something else in the Course in Miracles that I want to bring forward, mention. And that's this concept of love versus fear, and the idea that, and again, the Course, this is Course language, but they call our mean, angry, judgmental thoughts towards other people attack thoughts. But just think of them as judgmental thoughts. And they say we have these thoughts when we're unable to see the person with compassion because we're unable to recognize the fear that's driving them. And when we can sort of peel that onion, do that inquiry into what's the fear that's underneath that, then it's much easier to open our hearts. That the advice in the Course is that when we can see someone as fearful rather than bad or angry, we can see them as fearful, from that it's an easier step to open our hearts. And I think that's proven very true for me as long as I've been working with that concept. And it's often not hard to take the steps to seeing how behavior can be fear driven, especially as those of us that have been doing this work or work like it, where we've worked with our own fears that drive us to certain behaviors, and understand how much fear is a component in our lives, right? Fear of not being lovable, fear of not being worthy, fear of not being acceptable the way we are, fear of failure, fear of, all those. As the more we understand those, the more we can recognize them in other people, and it becomes easier to recognize fear-driven behavior in another person. It takes some practice, but it's easier.
And brings in the compassion.
Yeah. What's an example for you, Mike, of something you do when you're doing self-judgment? What do you do to shift that in yourself? Do you talk to yourself? I know you mentioned last time that physical movement and getting, outside and doing something will help you shift. What else is helpful for you?
If I'm deeply in it, the first thing I try to do is breathe. And it's funny, I actually come back to that a lot with myself and with a lot of people. It's like if you forget every other tool, if you have enough awareness to remember to pause and take a couple of deep breaths, it'll bring you more present. It'll bring you more resourceful. So that's the first thing that I do. I know that I have a daily practice I do in the morning that's designed to kind of clean myself out from any residue that might be kind of hanging around, which oftentimes there is. But in the moment, I think you mentioned movement. It's helpful, particularly in this day and age when there's so much sitting in front of a computer is if I can get up and move, if I can just kind of focus on my breath. Uh, those are a couple of, while they sound super simple, if I have enough awareness to do that, I can begin to shift my state. And I was thinking about, it's interesting as we think about the heart chart, which we referenced a couple of talks ago as one of the models in Insight. And I don't want to get into it too much because I know there's some people on the call that haven't done Insight, but all around the heart are action words: moving, involvement, doing. And that many of us can make those shifts by, we get knocked off and it's like, go clean the kitchen, right? Or, go for a walk or do something that engages your body. Because oftentimes we want to sit in the thing and try to fix it. And sometimes it's easier to actually do something physically to kind of shift our state.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. You've mentioned A Course in Miracles a couple of times. And one of the interesting statements that, this doesn't have to be a Course in Miracles promotion
All
talk,
right.
but one of the statements in there that has stayed with me since I also read it has been, forgiveness does not pardon sins and make them real. It sees that there was no sin. And I'm aware we haven't talked about sin. It tends to be more of a religious concept, but judgment, when we kind of judge ourselves harshly, it feels like we've sinned somehow. But what I like about the statement that's been powerful for me, because I have dedicated a lot of my life in the area of forgiveness. And forgiveness is this kind of interesting thing to talk about, but so many of us, like the person who you were talking about, who was sharing, that didn't know how to forgive themselves, forgive somebody else, and that somehow forgiveness can't just be a mental thought. And yet it's kind of like, well, how do I forgive? And that's been a big inquiry for me. But the statement helped me to kind of shift into that. Yes, we're all human. Do we all screw up? We do. That's part of what it means to be in a human state. And yet who we are underneath that in our heart, actually, there's nothing blemished there. There's nothing wrong there. And the thing you were just referencing, the fears, some of those fears, is the greatest pain comes from those deep beliefs that there's something wrong with me, that I'm not lovable, that
Right.
I'm not enough, I'm not, whatever those things are. Those are the wounds out of which so much of that comes, right? And the work that we do and keep doing, which is to kind of open up and find those spaces so we can heal those, so those don't tend to be driving us both consciously and unconsciously.
It's so beautiful. Say that quote again, Mike, if you would.
Uh, Forgiveness doesn't pardon sins and make it real. It sees that there was no sin.
Right.
Now that can be misunderstood and misinterpreted, and you say,
Sure.
"What are you talking about? Boy, that I really did something wrong there. They absolutely shouldn't be forgiven for
Yes.
that." And
Yes.
it doesn't mean, we don't say that there's not consequence. We're not saying that in a physical life that you do something and it doesn't have consequence. There shouldn't be consequence, but it has to do more with that part that is judging the essence of who we are. And I think
Yes.
your
Yes.
your compassion, your closed eye process was the invitation to look more deeply, look into the kind of the heart of that person in
Yeah.
terms of who they really are, or into my own. So
And a quote like that is it's an aspiration in a way. I think for me, it feels like, all right, I can't apply that to Hitler,
no,
right? Like I'm not there yet,
no.
but I can apply it to myself, or I apply it to my neighbor who annoys me,
Mhm.
you know, and gradually work with opening up and also inquiring enough to get to apply it to more and more extreme examples until I can really see what's true about it.
And not make it like so many of our tools and insight. It's like, not make it a thing you have to use in every situation. Like where it works, use it. You
Yeah.
know. Anyway, maybe we can go back to a couple more questions.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Joy says, I notice that I'm most agitated or judgmental when I have unmet needs that I'm not aware of. Goes back to the self-inquiry that Janet talked about. So asking myself, what do I need now? That helps a lot.
Yeah.
What do I need now? Helps a lot.
Yeah, great. That's great. Good one, Joy.
And
Yeah, sometimes when we're needing something, we're not taking care of ourselves, and we can be most judgmental. I can relate to that too. Yeah, it's good.
and what I love is that you asked yourself a good question. I think we might have mentioned this before, but what's going on in our imagination? What lens are we thinking through? What question are we answering? If the question is, why am I such a jerk? It's like, and then, the part of us will find evidence to prove that I'm a jerk, right? But if I can say, what can I learn from this? Or how can I bring my heart forward? Or what do I really need here? Like you said, now we're asking a question that's directing our focus and our energy into something that's more uplifting as opposed to pulling us down.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a great point, Mike. And I mean, in a way, it's one of the things I was asking you about, like what question might you use? When I just love to hear your advice on what questions you use to shift yourself out of something. I'm trying to think what my own are. What do I love though what Joy said, what do I need right now?
It's one of the things that I do. I don't quite have a question. I have questions I ask myself every morning. Like I
Yeah.
have, in fact, I started years ago with, waking up in the morning and having a core question that I would ask myself
Uh-huh.
as a way to, and keeping that question open. It wasn't always like, I wasn't looking like for an answer to forget it, but like keeping that question open to invite more and more and more things into that space. It used to be, why am I so lucky to have the gift of a new, miraculous, and beautiful day? Um, and just by asking the question, it would just open up kind of the space to kind of bring more of that in as I started the day. I noticed that one other thing that I noticed that I do that's really helpful for me if I get kind of in that tight space is to look out the window. Because it's like there's a whole world out there. I'm actually glancing now. It's dark now, but if I'm looking out the window of in my office here, there's trees out there, there's some space out there. And there's been times when I've been facilitating trainings where those are business trainings or insight trainings, usually more in some of the corporate trainings, when I'll feel like something will happen and gets triggered because I can have some strong self-talk when I'm around really high-level executives, and I have a little voice that says, "Oh, you're just little Mike Connor. What are you doing with these people?"
Right, right.
I feel like if I make a mistake, I can get quite triggered. And what I find is if I can look out a window, it gives me perspective. It's like there's a whole world out there. There's a whole sky out there. There's a whole and it shifts me out of, because when I go into judgment, I lose perspective. I mean, I just lose perspective quickly. So, and I love your invitation in terms of what's the question. In fact, I'm going to do a takeaway. I'll come back next week in our conversation in terms of what are a couple of questions that I'll make sure that I can kind of flip up when I notice I get knocked off. So thank
Yeah,
you.
good. Yeah, I think I'll do the same. It's interesting. All right, what else, Carol?
Antoinette says, truly though, it doesn't matter what the other person has done. Their behavior has to do with them and not me. I may judge them and I may feel superior to them. It doesn't matter because my behavior is not my responsibility, though their behavior may impact my life. It's not mine to judge. I'm human, so I get pissed off, and that's life. And this is the work of my life, learning acceptance. Wow, this conversation is deep.
Yeah, it's beautiful, Antoinette. Your behavior is your responsibility. Their behavior is not their responsibility. Exactly. Did I say that right? Their behavior is not your responsibility. You take things so beautifully deeply, Antoinette. Thank you for that. So good. I don't even need to comment on it. It's beautiful as a standalone.
And I think you just reinforced a lot of the work we do is not about anybody else, but about forgiving ourselves for the judgments that we place on somebody else.
Yeah.
Because we know we're looking through a lens all the time, right? And so when we're judging someone, we're not seeing them. We're not seeing them for who they really are. We're seeing them through the lens of our judgment. And so when we have that awareness, then the practice is, how do I bring compassion and self-forgiveness to the part of me that's judging? So I think it's a great call out.
Yeah, cool. What else, Carol?
Nancy says, is there a difference when you ask it in the form of a question? Why am I so lucky, rather than making it a statement of gratitude?
I think it's a great call out. And this is an area that I've played with. So we do a lot with affirmations. And I also do affirmations. Like I can say, I am, and I have a couple of affirmations I work. I also like working the question because it invites a creative part of me to answer that. There's a very powerful, there's a very powerful part of us. We can call it the imagination. Sometimes we reference it as more of the right brain or the intuitive brain, that when we ask it a question, it goes and searches everywhere to answer it. Like consciously and unconsciously begins to search for answers. So one of the aspects that I like about a question is, and by opening a positive question and leaving it open, is it actually opens our reticular activating system in terms of the filter to begin to look for evidence to answer that question. And so that's kind of the distinction. I think both are really powerful tools. The affirmation I like as affirming something as already so. The question I like is sort of opening up space to kind of gather data to reinforce something that I'd like to experience more of.
Yeah, it's lovely. I love that it goes in search of why it's true when we state it that way. I mean, I was just trying it real quick while you were saying it, Mike, and it's true. It's like we look for evidence to support when we ask that kind of question. Why am I a radiantly beautiful being? Right? It's like my mind is like, oh, because I'm really nice to people and because I share, right? It's like it looks for the answers. So that's very cool. I love that. I love that. Yeah, a couple more, Carol.
Lionel, my question is, who do I want to be in this situation?
Yeah, a great
Amen.
question.
Amen. Excellent.
And that does two things, because it asks a question and it brings you present. So I like that both of those aspects, Lionel.
Yeah, wonderful.
What Janet says about seeing the fears that drives others reminds me of a favorite quote from Longfellow. If we could read the secret history of our enemy, we would find sorrow and suffering sufficient to disarm all our hostility. Thoughts about this?
So beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. Is that Longfellow? Good heavens. I didn't realize it was Longfellow. I've heard it, but wow, that's beautiful. The secret history.
Yeah. Well, I noticed as you read it, my heart opened.
Yeah.
Like compassion came in just by hearing the statement. And, it just reminds me how quickly we can forget the amazing stories of every human being that's walking around us, that we just don't tend to tune into or really consider. And yet when we do, as the quote mentions there, it's almost like we can't not move into compassion and into humility as well.
I think it's one of the gifts that doing the seminars we've done has given all of us, Mike and I, and all of you graduates out there. When we can be in groups of people that are telling the truth about their lives, we begin to see those secret histories, right? We see how the person that looked like they had their act completely together across the room, actually turns out to have had all these struggles and painful experiences. So that we begin to be able to assume that everyone we meet has some painful secret history. And that opens our hearts. That's really one of the beautiful gifts of having been involved in this work or any work like it, where we've gotten to hear people tell the truth about their lives. It's a blessing.
You're so spot on, Janet. And we bring in compassion for others. And in that space, we also heal our own wounds, right? When we can bring them up and in a space where we feel safe enough to actually share that. Because when we feel like something, if we feel shame about something or guilt about something, or some of those histories are sitting inside of us, like have been true for me, to have a space that actually I can speak them out and have them accepted from a place of loving and acceptance is healing. Otherwise, they sit inside, kind of a lock inside in terms of a place of shame or guilt, which I think so many of us can walk around almost our whole lives with some of that.
Yes. So true. So true.
Maybe
well, maybe we can have one or two more, Mike, do you think? Yeah.
Carson says, thanks for this conversation. What works best for me these days is to enter a truly compassionate place, is to drop fully into my body with a few conscious breaths.
Yeah. Thank you, Carson. Thank you.
And,
lovely.
And maybe a cold beer.
I'll join you for that. Final one, Carol?
Comment, Sue says surrender is the way through.
Surrender.
I love the statement. I mean, we could go another half hour just unpeeling that one, and you know what we talked. I think it was two conversations ago, Jan, around the difference between surrender and resignation, and how do we let go in a way that let go of the judgment, or let go of in a way that and I do believe it's the way through. That if we are in resistance or judging or in that space, it can be like a bit of a wall. And that ability to surrender and let go. I think particularly there's so much of that right-wrong dynamic that comes in this space, right? We're on judgment, that kind of core game that we talk about, and that surrender is a surrendering oftentimes of needing to be right, whether it's about about me being right about making somebody else wrong, or me being even right about a point of view I have, right?
Yep. And I love that definition of surrender as giving up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We think of giving up as deflating, but if we're giving it up, like to a higher part of ourselves, I think that's a nice way to think about surrender too. Yeah. Wonderful. Oh, I wish we were all together and we could be talking more about all this. Thank you for your wonderful contributions, everybody. So much good stuff and so much beauty out there. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So I thought you did that lovely centering closed eye process. Maybe I'll just do a very brief one to kind of wrap us up, and then we'll spend a little bit of time sharing a little bit about what's coming next.
Perfect.
So as Janet mentioned, if you are comfortable, you can sit back, kind of get comfortable, and just allow your eyes to come closed. I'm not going to be bringing in music for my piece, so just go ahead and take a deep breath in. And let it go. And go ahead and take one more deep breath in and hold it at the top just for a moment. And release. And just take a moment to notice the inhale and the exhale of your breath. And allow your focus to come right down into your heart. And maybe you can even imagine yourself breathing right into your heart chakra. And then breathing back out, allowing each breath to be infused with the loving of your heart, where that compassion sits deep inside of you. And as we've spoken, if any judgments have come forward that you notice you hold towards yourself or towards anybody else, or any agitation, just see if you can breathe in right into your heart, and then just send that compassion and that loving to any of those thoughts or anywhere in your body where you might be holding any separation, any judgment, anything that disconnects you from your heart and from yourself. And as you do, just remember that you're human. You're doing the best you can, as we all are. And maybe with this next breath, just breathe in a bit of gratitude and acknowledgement for all that you do and all that you've done and all that you will do, because of your commitment to connect to your heart, to know yourself, to forgive, and to express compassion for yourself and those around you. One more deep breath in. And let it go. And as you're ready, you can begin to come on back. You have your eyes closed. And Don or Carol, if you'd like to put a couple of slides up, we'll just talk about a few upcoming things, and then we'll send you on your way. So what do we have first? I guess our next and final conversation, right, Janet? Next
Yeah.
Thursday. Well, I hope it's not our final one. This is our
Yeah.
first, just for this round.
Final of this series of 4. Yeah.
You know, and if you've enjoyed these, let us know. I mean, we'd be happy to do more of these as we move forward, because I know I certainly have enjoyed them, and so
I've loved it. I've loved it, Mike. It's been
been
wonderful.
a lot of fun. The next one is really all looking at um, bringing meaning to our life in the world now. So next Thursday, so much has changed in the past year. So much has happened. It's been disruptive for a lot of us, and so we're going to really be exploring how do we bring a sense of meaning to ourselves and to the world now as things are changing. So I think that's going to be a very rich conversation. Feel free to join us, and let other people know, because again, these are open to not only graduates but also to your friends and family who haven't done Insight. It's a great way to just, even if they just want to listen in, great way to introduce them.
Oh, sure.
What else we have? I think, are we going to talk a little bit about your Monday night gig that Carol and Don, you do, or are we going to, what's the next slide we have?
So
There we
this
go.
is the Insight Boston website. And for every Monday evening, Carol and I host a 1-hour Zoom meeting, and we take 2 tips from the Insight One seminar, and we talk about them. People share their thoughts on it, for example, how they have used it in their life or how they possibly can use it in their life. And everyone has a chance to share, and there's no judgment, of course. There's no feedback or advice, and everybody feels great at the end. It's really a wonderful feeling. Everybody is welcome. And if you want to look at it, some more information about it, there's the insightboston.org website. And over in the right-hand corner here, we have more information. If you were just to click on here, you'll have more information about what it's about. And there's tip number 16 from Mike that you can take a look at. And once again, it's Monday evenings from 7 to 8 p.m.
Great.
Mm,
That's
thank you.
excellent. So thank you so much for doing that, Don and Carol.
Mm.
It's been, I think, a real gift to the community in this time when we haven't been able to get together. So it's wonderful.
And I think there's one last thing we want to just mention. If you want to go to the Insight seminars.org website, the global website, there is a Insight Ignite program that's coming up in March. 2 weekends, 3 hours the first weekend, 5 hours the second weekend. I've heard it's an excellent program. If you have interest, go ahead and take a look. My understanding is they're doing an Insight 2 right now as we speak. An online Insight 2 is actually happening.
Wow.
So I think that's it, Janet. So wonderful to connect with you. Don and Carol, thank you. And thank you to all of our volunteer leadership team and everybody. And a big thank you to everybody who joins us this evening. Hope to see you next week.
Yeah. My love to all of you. Thank you so much. Love you,
Thank
man.
you for doing this for us.
You bet.
All right.
Bye.
Bye now, everybody. Good night.
Good night.